this on you. I'm working for Mel Brooks. Not in the face.
A comedy legend who's also one of the few people to have attained EGOT status. That means he's won Emmys, Grammys, Oscars and Tonys. Meanwhile, I'm still working hard for my first Employee of the Month trophy down at Volpanovic & Sons Pest Exterminators. Been there 22 years and every month I get pipped at the post by those and Sons Nepo babies.
Goodbye, head. Hello, balls.
Anyway, from the producers to the producers and everything in between. It's Stam Fine's Mel Brooks special.
It's good to be the king. Jesus.
Yes.
What?
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 Yes.
Jesus.
What?
Yes.
What?
Rather than look at a specific movie or franchise or compare two similar movies, today we want to do something different. We want to look at the movies and some television shows created or co-created by Mel Brooks, one of my favourite comedy directors. He wrote, he directed, he acted, he sang, and occasionally he produced.
Occupation?
Stand-up philosopher.
Oh, a bullshit artist.
As this is a review channel, we'll be looking at the films that soared, the ones that didn't, the ones that remained relevant, and the ones that haven't. But with a body of work that would make other directors envious, even a lesser Mel Brooks movie is worth looking at. Except Life Stinks, we couldn't find that one.
Thank you, and goodbye. Goodbye, have a nice day.
Melvin Kaminsky had wanted to be in show business ever since he saw Anything Goes on Broadway. He had wanted to be a drummer, but couldn't fit his name on a bass drum, and so he used his mother's maiden name, Brookman. But again, couldn't fit that on the drum, so he became Brooks. This was during the big band era, but I guess if he was born much later and he wanted to be a drummer during the heavy metal era, he could have had a kit with 2 kick drums and kept his name.
Shit!
Drumming as a stepping stone to comedy godhood might seem like a stretch, but think about it. They're both professions built on timing. Also, drummers make for classic musician jokes like, what's the difference between a drummer and a drum machine? On a drum machine, you only have to punch in the notes once. It would also not surprise you to learn that I had to give up drumming because people kept mistaking my facial bruising for stage makeup, and audiences thought our group was a Kiss cover band.
Did you bullshit last week?
No.
Did you try to bullshit last week?
Yes.
Mel Brooks started his career as an entertainer doing various jobs at Borscht Belt hotels, and after a stint in the army during World War II, Brooks ended up working as an assistant for a Broadway producer. A producer whose main concern was not the quality of his productions. Throughout the 1950s, Mel Brooks was employed as a writer for Sid Caesar's various hit television shows and specials, though Brooks would occasionally do side projects in between seasons. One short stint writing movies in Hollywood convinced him that that was his future, though as it turned out that would be in the far future as Brooks kept churning out jokes for Caesar's television shows for a few more years. His stint working as a television writer would last nearly a decade, in which time he'd work alongside Neil Simon and Woody Allen, and he'd also meet a man who'd become his best friend in life, Carl Reiner. Outside of paid work, Reiner and Brooks made silly improv recordings for their own amusement. Carl Reiner would play straight man and ask questions of Brooks, who was playing a 2,000-year-old man. Friends loved their improv sessions, and talk show host Steve Allen insisted that they put their sessions out as a comedy album.
And what have you done, LSD?
Man, about 6 months. But I'm on probation.
By 1960, the constant television work was at an end, meaning Brooks was a free agent. But that meant he was an out-of-work free agent. He and Reiner went into a studio to record the first of what would be several albums featuring the Q&A sessions of the 2,000-year-old man. Record sales and some work on commercials were Mel Brooks's main source of income in the early 1960s, but it wasn't all that regular.
All you need is money, Bloom.
By this time, Mel Brooks was dating Broadway star Anne Bancroft, and she would become his second wife in 1964. This time, it stuck. Good for them. So of course, more steady income would be helpful while Brooks worked on writing.
Look, Herman, I'm in Hedy Lamar's shoes.
Headley.
In 1964, he'd taken a meeting at agency Talent Associates where Brooks was asked to write something for television. At the time, the biggest things were Inspector Clouseau and James Bond. So why not just do them at the same time? Brooks teamed up with Buck Henry, and together they spent 3.5 months writing a pilot for a new television series. Mel Brooks had hated how almost every television comedy in the early 60s was a fairly standard family sitcom. His idea, the main character would be an idiotic spy. Agent 86 was named after restaurant worker slang for being out of an item, rather than the more general slang about dumping something. The hero's first name was a Brooks family name. Max, and his surname was, ironically enough, Smart. The show's title, Get Smart. Don Adams was cast as Maxwell Smart, Agent 86, an idiotic spy who doesn't quite realise that he's an idiot. I swear I had a driving instructor exactly like that, who insisted on putting the floor mats underneath the car to stop his tyres from getting dirty. Barbara Feldon was Agent 99, somebody who has to compensate for Max's deficiency as a spy, but without ever letting him know.
Sorry about that, Chief.
Ed Platt was cast as the chief of the spy agency Control, whose very existence was to go up against the forces of chaos.
This is chaos. We don't do here.
Get Smart took on every cliched trope and convention for spies and secret agents and subverted them, from secret codes, telephones embedded in everything, including Max's shoe, hidden bases, gadget-laden cars, agents just hidden everywhere, a robot spy, supervillains.
I demand the cone of silence.
And of course there was the cone of silence, under which
you'll be facing every kind of danger imaginable.
And loving it.
A 1965 pilot was made for ABC, who passed on it.
Missed it by that much.
But the show was picked up by NBC. Get Smart was the highest rated series on television ever, with 1 billion viewers.
I find that very hard to believe.
Would you believe it was a moderate success?
No.
How about the only people watching were drunks who passed out in front of the television? The series struggled in the ratings for its first season, but without a promising replacement series, NBC decided to renew Get Smart, after which the show really took off in popularity. Mel Brooks would not remain involved with the day-to-day running of Get Smart once it was up and running.
I've trained my mind to go completely blank anytime I wanted to.
That's right, he can do that.
There was an idea that he'd wanted to explore for a while, a play inspired by his days as a theatrical producer's assistant. You saw this coming, right? He'd written Springtime for Hitler for the theatre, but was told that he had too many characters and settings for a play, but that this could work as a movie.
Springtime for Hitler. A gay romp with Adolf and Eva at Berchtesgaden.
Brooks then rewrote Springtime for Hitler as a screenplay and got nibbles from producer Sidney Glazier and distributor Josephine Levine at Embassy. But there was one problem. Barely 2 decades on from the end of the Second World War, no exhibitors would screen a movie called Springtime for Hitler. The producers were suggested as a replacement. And if they thought of something better later on, then bully for them.
I never realized that the Third Reich meant Germany.
Brooks, with no history of directing movies, considered himself to be the ideal director, but first he needed some experience, which led him to direct some commercials.
There was a painter. He could paint an entire apartment in one afternoon, 2 coats!
Accountant Leo Bloom is sent to do the books of shady Broadway producer Max Bialystock.
I'm wearing a cardboard belt!
Where Leo discovers his new client's modus operandi is to raise money from old ladies by seducing them, and discovering that cobwebs really do get everywhere.
But under the right circumstances, a producer could make more money with a flop than he could with a hit.
And so the pair set to work on putting on the most surefire failure, a failure that could only ever be eclipsed by Tiny Tim's death metal album, Black Tulip.
Springtime for Hitler and Germany.
Springtime for Hitler is in such appalling bad taste that it couldn't possibly become a hit. Though unfortunately, it becomes a hit, leading to Bloom and Bialystock being sent to jail, where old habits are hard to break. Gene Wilder and Zero Mostel turned in iconic performances that were just broad enough, but not so broad as to be distracting.
Please tender our compliments to the chef.
Please tender half a buff.
There wasn't much faith in the film from Embassy, but Peter Sellers had seen the film and raved about it, after which time the film would find an appreciative audience. Not necessarily a big audience, just an appreciative one. Pre-release concerns about audiences finding the film to be in bad taste proved unfounded. Also unfounded, Bigfoot's Beach Shack.
Don't be stupid, be a smarty. Come and join the Nazi party.
Mel Brooks' response to suggestions of bad taste was that Hitler was such a sick joke of a human being that you might as well laugh at him and his pathetic followers. Also, it's the 1960s, so nobody was crying about the fucking Nazis' feelings. Mel Brooks would win an Academy Award for Best Screenplay for The Producers. As he'd already won an Emmy, that was 2 down, 2 to go.
I want those chairs.
The 12 Chairs in 1970 was adapted from a novel about 3 men in post-Soviet Russia who were on the trail of a set of chairs that apparently had a fortune in gems hidden inside one of the chairs. It's satiric and broad, but far more grounded than most of Brooks's subsequent work.
Soldier shooting, it was terrible, terrible.
Oh, yes. I think it was called The Revolution.
That was it.
There are many gags, but they are relatively organic and based on the characters rather than silly situations.
I want to grovel at your feet. I must grovel at your feet.
No groveling. There will be no groveling in this house.
12 Chairs was loaded with serious actors like Ron Moody and Frank Langella playing mercenary characters, along with Dom DeLuise, where the trio spend much of the film trying to cheat each other. 12 Chairs is one of Brooks' least remembered films, but it does look great. The film was shot mostly on location in what was then Yugoslavia, but it's the Mel Brooks film that most looks like a proper movie. Until this point, Brooks had mainly been a behind-the-scenes player, a writer or a director, but when no local actors fit the bill, Brooks ended up playing a small role in the movie. Rumours that the director Brooks was trying to fire actor Brooks over a clash of egos are A. untrue, B. grossly untrue, C. completely untrue, or D. all of the above.
You'll make me laugh. Wah, 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 wah.
12 Chairs was the sort of film that played well with a type of big city audience, but it was not the sort of film that a mass audience embraced at a time when counterculture had morphed into just plain culture. Brooks' first two films had been made for relatively small budgets, and by and large were critical darlings. Neither, of course, was a massive success. Mel Brooks' next film would change that.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Writer Andrew Bergman had sold a script to Warner Brothers in 1971 called Tex X, about a black sheriff in the Old West. The studio's original plan was for James Earl Jones to star and for Alan Arkin to direct, a film that was set in the 1870s, but everybody spoke like it was the 1970s.
Hi. Hi. Your name? Your name? Schmucks.
When that first iteration went nowhere, Mel Brooks, who wasn't getting anywhere trying to launch his own projects, was offered the job of directing. He accepted as long as he was able to rewrite the basic premise as a parody of every Western ever.
Well, that's the end of this suit.
To do this, he retained Bergman and opened a writing room, bringing in other writers, including nightclub comedian Richard Pryor, where they would reshape the script over multiple drafts.
Never mind that shit. Here comes Mungo.
The film tells a story of a town that's in the way of a railroad, and corrupt Hedley Lamar wants to run the locals out of town. He sends them Sheriff Bart, who the locals do not warm to.
A man drink like that and he don't eat, he is going to die.
When?
At one point, Mel Brooks had wanted Richard Pryor for the role of Sheriff Bart, but Pryor's reputation for unreliability put an end to that idea. Cleavon Little was cast as Bart, somebody who could be charming even in the face of utter hatred.
Tell him what I said. Ow!
Wire, main office, tell him I said ow.
Deeply ingrained racism, or to give its more genteel title, prejudice, was the central theme of the film.
Gee, in another 25 years, you'll be able to shake their hands in broad daylight.
The film parodies a worldview that was only just starting to fade ever so slightly, and did it using language that's not going to get played in this video. I love Blazing Saddles to bits and wouldn't change a bit of it. But then I get what it's about. Hedley's plan hinges on the people of Rockridge being so racist that they'll leave because they're sent a black sheriff, which then blows up in Hedley's face when Bart saves the town anyway.
Listen to him, man. He's just crazy enough to do it.
Brooks' films often made fun of really hateful characters, whether it's Nazis or other Commonwealth Garden racists.
They lose me right after the bunker scene.
Who of course really hate it when a racist character is portrayed as idiotic, stupid, moronic, hateful, small-minded, dim-witted, hypocritical, incoherent, childish, petty, cruel, weird, and with an intellect that rivals an ant with a brain injury caused by autoerotic asphyxia gone wrong.
Could you repeat that, sir?
But what they really hate is the suggestion that you just ignore them and their chicken shit. Blazing Saddles just does that in a much funnier way and ends with a pie fight. And if I could end this video with a pie fight, I absolutely would.
Once you establish yourself, they got to accept you.
It's a film where many will opine that you couldn't make it today, but that does miss the point. Perhaps you couldn't, but you really shouldn't need to. What do you mean there's comment in a Mel Brooks film?
How does the Senate vote?
Fuck the poor!
Well, the 12 Chairs, To Be or Not to Be, and Life Stinks all say something. They just weren't the goofball monster hits that Blazing Saddles would become.
We'll kill the firstborn male child in every household.
Too Jewish.
But if you're adamant his films only consisted of pratfalls and goofy jokes, then I have some mountains to sell you. announcing our new Himalayas package, where for the low price of $9.99 in gift cards, you get all the major peaks. You get Everest, you get Annapurna, you get Makalu, you get Kachinjunga, and get Lotsa. May incur oversized delivery fee.
Shit kicker.
So while the people of Rockridge do get over themselves at the end of the film, it does take a lot of work to get there.
You gotta remember that these are just simple farmers. You know, morons.
Sheriff Bart finds himself in a strange place but is determined to make a difference, if people will let him.
Sheriff, you can't go now. We need you.
Plus, Cleavon Little also gets some of the best lines in a film
Candygram for mango.
that's got a lot of great lines.
The bitch was inventing the candygram. And they probably won't give me credit for it.
The rest of the casting was just as perfect.
Whilst I will be risking an almost certain Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor.
Brooks had shown the script to Gene Wilder and offered him the role of Hedley Lamar, but Wilder said he wasn't right for the part. But how about the Waco kid? Nah, said Brooks, he wanted an older dramatic actor.
Where would I find such a man? Why am I asking you?
Brooks cast Harvey Korman as Attorney General Hedley Lamar. That proved to be one of his best remembered roles.
Thank you, Hetty, thank you.
It's not Hetty, it's Hedley Lamar.
Hedley is devious, greedy, and manipulative, which are three qualities that my chiropractor possesses in large quantities.
The hell are you worried about? This is 1874. You'll be able to sue her.
And apparently actress and inventor Hedley Lamar didn't get the joke and she did sue.
Steady as a rock.
Yeah, but I shoot with this hand.
Gig Young was eventually cast as the Waco Kid, despite reservations about his drinking. Good news, he wasn't drinking. Bad news, he was having terrible withdrawal symptoms, so bad that he wasn't able to get through the first scene before becoming violently ill.
Are we black?
Yes, we are.
Then we're awake, but we're very puzzled.
Brooks had to lean on Gene Wilder to come over and take over the role at short notice. History does not record whether Brooks ever told Wilder that he hoped he wasn't out of line with a crack about Gene Wilder never ever appearing in Blazing Saddles.
I'm so tired.
Madeline Kahn was a great singer who had to tone down her abilities to match the Marlene Dietrich-style Lily von Stupp. Footballer and future star of Webster, Alex Karras, was Mongo. Western movie evergreen Slim Pickens was henchman Taggart, and fireman Burton Gilliam would become a full-time actor after playing Taggart's sidekick Lyle. Mel Brooks appears here and there mainly as the incompetent governor Lepedemain, an easily distracted idiot.
Impressed?
There were people at the studio horrified by parts of the movie. The use of slurs, punching old women.
Have you ever seen such cruelty?
Punching horses. But one of their biggest bugaboos was over the campfire scene. Flatulence was just not something you heard or smelt much of in a movie unless you went to see Love Story after a heavy meal. But every Western that Brooks had ever watched had a scene of people eating beans at campfires, and nobody ever lets rip. In Blazing Saddles, every stifled fart from every Western was let loose at one point. It's only a miracle there wasn't an explosion. While it's one of the longest fart jokes in movie history, it's also one of, if not the very first time that actual farting was presented in an American movie.
It expressed a courage little seen in this day and age.
Blazing Saddles is one of those films where the television version made for US networks was radically different, containing deleted scenes to make up for the various cuts, and different sound effects. Blazing Saddles has people breaking the fourth wall, having characters talk about things in the far future, and at one point the camera pulls back to reveal the Warner Brothers lot. Not simply content with decimating the Western, Brooks has his climactic battle spill over into another soundstage where a musical is being filmed.
Keep the faith, brothers!
One of the final touches, a song was needed for the opening titles. Brooks and John Morris put together a song, but needed somebody like singer Frankie Lane, who'd sung on many classic westerns. So in the end, they just hired Frankie Lane.
So I know you're a bit confused, wondering what you're doing out in the middle of the prairie in the middle of the night.
You bet your ass!
I'm here.
The film was made for around $2.5 million, but made well over $100 million at the box office, meaning Mel Brooks was now a very hot director. And what do you do when you have a hit on your hands?
That's it, baby, when you got it, flaunt it! Flaunt it!
While making Blazing Saddles, Gene Wilder had been working on his own script about a descendant of Dr. Frankenstein. He showed it to Mel Brooks and told him that his dream was for the pair to co-write it and for Brooks to direct, which seems an oddly specific but rather flattering dream. The pair worked on the script at night after shooting Blazing Saddles during the day.
The only thing that concerns me is the preservation of life!
Brooks found a receptive audience in Alan Ladd Jr. at 20th Century Fox when he was pitching it to film studios, though the reception cooled somewhat when Brooks announced he was making the film in black and white.
It could work!
Young Frankenstein would be a faithful representation of 1930s horror films, particularly James Whale's Frankenstein movies. Dr. Frederick Frankenstein...
That's Frankenstein.
Frankenstein is a brilliant surgeon who's dismissive of his grandfather's past, but he travels to Transylvania after he inherits a castle. He meets Igor...
No, it's pronounced Igor.
Inga and Frau Blucher. And after a spell of denying his grandfather's achievements, he decides to continue his work by reanimating a parts bin special. Young Frankenstein is much slower than Blazing Saddles, yet it's almost as funny.
Give him a set of give!
The film generally does not break the fourth wall to anywhere near the same extent as Brooks' previous film, apart from any time when Marty Feldman's on screen. Wilder and Brooks made a fantastic team, though the only major disagreement between them was over the scene of the monster singing Putting on the Ritz.
Why don't you go where fashion sits?
Mel Brooks later admitted he was wrong, and it is one of the funniest moments in the movie.
Perhaps I could help you with that hump.
What hump?
Marty Feldman was a British writer turned comedy actor who had his own television series in the UK.
Didn't you used to have that on the other side?
What?
Terry Garr proved to be a natural for this type of comedy.
You would have an enormous Schwanzstücke.
Madeline Kahn as Frankenstein's fiancée almost stole the show in her relatively few scenes as the eventual bride of Frankenstein. Kenneth Mars as Inspector Kemp added a level of ultra-serious goofiness, and Peter Boyle was fantastic as the childlike monster.
He was my boyfriend!
Chloris Leachman found a niche playing grotesque characters in Brooks' films, starting with Frau Blucher. Gene Hackman appeared for the fun of it as a blind hermit.
I was going to make espresso.
Peter Boyle and Marty Feldman's appearance in the movie was mainly down to the fact that they shared the same agent as Gene Wilder. Young Frankenstein is Mel Brooks at his most atmospheric. It's his most filmic looking movie, where the lighting, staging and composition feel like Wilder and Brooks watched those 30s films again and again, absorbing absolutely everything. They even managed to find the original props used in Frankenstein's laboratory in the 30s movies. Young Frankenstein would hit theatres in December of 1974, opening at the same time as The Towering Inferno and The Godfather Part 2. No pressure.
My name is Frankenstein!
Young Frankenstein would also turn out to be a monster hit.
Oh, shit!
Gene Wilder, though, was keen to work on his own projects, where he would direct himself, Madeline Kahn and Marty Feldman in The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes' Smarter Brother. Feldman, too, would also go on to direct his own parody film in 1977, the last remake of Beau Geste, but he would work for Mel Brooks one more time. So how do you top a throwback black and white movie? A silent movie. Silent Movie was about a washed-up director, Mel Funn, along with his sidekicks Marty Eggs and Dom Bell. In it, Funn wants to make a silent movie despite studio executives being aghast, but Funn insists it would be full of big stars. The trio then get into various scrapes around Los Angeles in trying to acquire big names, where they land Burt Reynolds, Liza Minnelli, James Kahn, Anne Bancroft and Paul Newman. But curiously, not mime legend Marcel Marceau.
No!
Brooks had a lot of fun with the studio conglomerate Engulf and Devour, and hired his old boss, Sid Caesar, as the head of a failing studio whose only salvation was a silent movie. Silent Movie also gave a big role to Bernadette Peters, who's initially a spy but would fall in love with Mel Funn. And to play Funn, well, Brooks himself was suggested as the star, something that he initially dismissed. He had played no on-screen role at all in Young Frankenstein, specifically because Gene Wilder wanted him to concentrate on directing. But now he wasn't just in a supporting role, he was also the leading man. Mel Funn is an alcoholic on the wagon, but falls off the wagon, but then has to quickly sober up and get back on the wagon. Dom DeLuise's character is large, and he drinks a lot of coke. Marty Feldman as Marty Eggs is a guy who wears a wrestler's cap for reasons too numerous to get into without recourse to diagrams and charts. It's a slapstick movie with almost no dialogue, a few caption cards, and very few sound effects. The oral side of the film is mainly handled through the score by John Morris, somebody who handled the music for almost all of Brooks's films up until the 1990s. Silent Movie is a film that really commits to the bit, where there are long stretches of silence in the soundtrack, which do tend to make the film feel like it's much longer than it is. It's like a sausage dog riding in a stretched limo. It's not all that long, it just feels that way. Silent Movie was released in the summer of 1976, where it was quite successful and easily profitable, but it did make less than half of each of Brooks' previous two monster-sized hits.
Who goes there, friend or foe?
Friend.
What about the horse?
In between the release of Young Frankenstein and Silent Movie, Brooks had another project on the boil, a television comedy based on the story of Robin Hood. When Things Were Rotten was co-created by Brooks, Norman Stiles and John Boney as a half-hour, one-camera sitcom, very much in the vein of Get Smart and I suppose a little bit of Blazing Saddles, but in a TV-friendly way.
I'll be fine by nightfall.
It's full of familiar faces: Dick Gaultier as Robin Hood, along with Bernie Koppel, Dick Van Patten, Misty Rowe, Richard Dimitri and Ron Rivkin.
But I am suffering from exhaustion and brush fire.
It debuted as part of the full 1975 season, though only 13 episodes were made before ABC pulled the pin, replacing the series with The Bionic Woman.
As you were.
Oh, that's cool. I was over here.
Which way is the sun facing, man?
When Things Were Rotten is generally quite fast-paced, but despite the vast array of comedic talent involved, honestly I found it an incredible slog to watch, where it just took me something like a year to watch those 13 episodes. The amusing bits are buried in amongst all of the mugging and knowing dialogue.
We'd better get him some food quick.
Nobody delivers this time of night.
Brooks co-wrote the pilot and was a producer, though he wasn't necessarily overseeing every aspect of production.
Those are my mother's favorite drinks!
Unlike his later Robin Hood movie parody, this wasn't based on any one specific Robin Hood, but a blend of every Robin Hood.
After what we've just seen...
There was also an unsold pilot for a television series version of Blazing Saddles called Black Bart, which would have starred Louis Gossett Jr.
Nothing wrong with my nose.
Brooks' next target was something that was very ripe for parody: Alfred Hitchcock films. High Anxiety is about Dr. Richard Thorndike, who's just taken over a mental hospital, only to find his facility is run for the profit of Nurse Diesel and Dr. Montague, with Chloris Leachman and Harvey Korman's double act being utterly delicious.
I got it. I got it. I ain't got it.
Madeline Kahn is worried about her father's treatment in the hospital, but Thorndike has other problems. Firstly, he does not at all like heights, and secondly, he's framed for murder.
What is this? Who are you?
Now, the only thing that would make that worse is if he was framed for murder at the top of the Empire State Building.
Number one, or cocky duty?
Well, let's say for the sake of argument, cocky duty.
Another source of anxiety, trying to address a psychiatric convention without using anatomical terms in front of some children.
Are you saying there's absolutely no validity to PP envy?
Brooks's co-writers each play smaller parts in the film, including future Rain Man director Barry Levinson as a hysterical bellhop.
That kid gets no tip.
The film parodies Hitchcock films perfectly, from Vertigo, Psycho, North by Northwest, and of course, The Birds. Brooks talked to the man himself before shooting, and later on, Hitchcock announced that he loved the film. High Anxiety is not quite Blazing Saddles or Young Frankenstein level brilliance, but it has become one of my favourite Brooks projects.
High Anxiety.
Of course, it works best if you have seen a couple of Hitchcock films in your time. Otherwise, it feels just a little flat. So go and watch some Hitchcock films and then watch High Anxiety.
What a dramatic airport.
Brooks wanted to use the famed movie artist Albert Whitlock to add production value with matte paintings. Brooks also cajoled Whitlock into playing a small role in the film as Madeline Kahn's father. Whitlock's matte paintings added a lot of production value and would partly inspire Mel Brooks for his next film.
What are you wearing?
High Anxiety, in the grand scheme of things, is an above-average Brooks film, but by now his films would perform in a fairly narrow range, unlike his two 1974 smash hits. From a personal point of view, Silent Movie and High Anxiety seem to be repeated constantly in the early 80s where I lived. High Anxiety was also the point where Mel Brooks added another feather to his cap. But look, we're not here to talk about his choice of hats. Brooks now produced his movies, and from now on, under his Brooks Films banner, would also produce movies for other filmmakers. Anne Bancroft's directing debut Fatso, David Lynch's The Elephant Man, movies like My Favourite Year, 84 Charing Cross Road, Solar Babies, The Fly and The Fly 2. Like I always say to a line of mountains infested by bees, that's range, honey.
These 15! Wait. 10! 10 commandments!
Brooks liked the idea of something epic, and now that he had a Matt guy, he thought he could film anything. History of the World Part 1 is a series of sketches set in various historical periods, though it has 2 longer sections. It starts off with vignettes detailing man's beginning, where apparently the species invented podcasting before fire. Orson Welles introduced parts of the film, where he's heard most during a sequence on the cavemen.
With the birth of the artist came the inevitable afterbirth, the critic.
Bring me a small liar.
A small liar. Small liar. I didn't do it. I didn't do it.
The film's longest sequence is set in ancient Rome. Brooks is Comicus, an unemployed stand-up philosopher. His agent Swiftus gets him a gig playing at Caesar's palace, but along the way he meets slave Josephus and Vestal Virgin Miriam. Dom DeLuise was Emperor Nero, and Madeline Kahn was Empress Nympho, who needs to select escorts to the orgy.
No. Yes. No.
When Comicus's gig doesn't go too well, it's time to escape.
I'm fighting with cardboard!
The group will get away by rolling a giant joint.
Let the coolness get into our vertebrae.
And then hide out in a restaurant where Jesus is having a meal with his 11 best friends and one guy who's one of the friends' roommates.
Judas! Do you want a beverage?
The middle section was an interlude featuring the Grand Inquisitor Torquemada, feared architect of the Spanish Inquisition.
Let's face it, you can't talk him out of anything.
So when you're watching a movie about Mel Brooks, the last thing you expect is the Spanish Inquisition.
We have a mission to convert the Jews.
Another interlude was set in the lead up to the French Revolution, where the debauched King Louis fears he may be killed and installs a double in his place. Brooks plays both the king and his near-identical twin, Jacques the Piss Boy.
You look like the piss boy. And you look like a bucket of shit.
The revolutionaries mistake Jacques for the king, and he's about to find out why the guillotine caused sales of bow ties, glasses and earmuffs to drop off in France dramatically. Then Josephus turns up, don't ask, and it's nearly time for the end of the film.
The Inquisition. Let's begin the Inquisition.
The Spanish Inquisition musical is fantastic, and the French Revolution scene much tighter than the Roman sequence.
Bullshit.
Richard Pryor was originally signed to play Josephus, but he had managed to set himself on fire just before he was due to start filming. Madeline Kahn suggested Gregory Hines as a replacement, and he was on set within days.
The streets are crawling with soldiers. See?
Like most of the Brooks films, the bulk of the movie was shot in the US.
People of France.
Though for a change of scenery, the French Revolution sequence was filmed in the UK.
It's good to be the king.
Reviews at the time weren't particularly glowing, and when you watch History of the World Part 1,
We're off on the road to Judea.
It's obviously bitsy by nature, and it's full of some really good gags and some quotable lines.
The Roman Empire? Fuck it.
But the Roman section in particular can feel really drawn out with very long scenes where the gags are amusing rather than gut-busting.
Boy, you are nuts. NVTS nuts.
Brooks would cast many of the writers and alumni from his previous movies. Dom DeLuise, Madeline Kahn, Ron Cary, Harvey Korman and Chloris Leachman all appear, as do many old-school comedians throughout the movie.
When you convert.
No.
Also appearing Sid Caesar, Mary Margaret Humes, Nigel Hawthorne, Spike Milligan, Pamela Stevenson and B. Arthur.
The first Homo sapien marriage occurred.
Orson Welles was contracted to do a few days of narration, but he managed to wrap up his work in a few hours.
It was shortly followed by the first homosexual marriage,
which would leave him more time to go and make wine ads.
Joe's out in space.
For me, this was the first Mel Brooks movie that I saw on home video, which would possibly turn out to be the way many people would first experience Mel Brooks movies in the 1980s.
Six transit Gloria. I didn't know Gloria was sick.
So it's a film with some good bits, but there's just a little bit too much padding with so-so material. That would never happen on this channel. We would never, ever go off into an unfunny tangent, because you know who does that? My cousin Ted. Oh God, he's such a dork.
Not necessarily.
History of the World Part 1 was released in June of 1981 and made 3 times its budget, so it was profitable, but the budget was much higher and the returns lower than Brooks's 1970s movies.
The Inquisition's here and it's here to stay!
In 1983, Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft starred in To Be or Not to Be, which was not a typical Mel Brooks movie. He produced, but Alan Johnson directed it, and it was a remake of the 1942 film by Ernst Lubitsch, where it's more of a typical farce than an anarchic Mel Brooks parody. It was also Mel Brooks' first underperforming film in over a decade. It's perhaps better known for Brooks' novelty single To Be or Not to Be, which was subtitled Hitler Rap.
Is this England? Oh my God.
Mel Brooks is an egotistical Polish actor when the country is invaded by Germany. His wife had flirted with having an affair with a Polish airman, but they have to deal with a German spy. At various points, Mel Brooks' character Bronski poses as a German collaborator and a German officer.
I'll give the greatest performance I've ever given.
Don't. Just be good.
But in order for he and his friends to escape occupied Poland, he's going to have to play Hitler. You know, he of the Third Reich, but only one ball.
How many assholes we got on this ship anyhow?
Go!
When you look at the genres that Brooks had covered so far, apart from a quick joke at the end of History of the World Part 1, he'd not really touched science fiction. Spaceballs was released in 1987, where it's mainly a spoof of the Star Wars movies, with a couple of Star Trek jokes thrown in.
Why didn't somebody tell me my ass was so big?
A princess runs off from her wedding and is hunted by the Spaceballs, led by the evil Dark Helmet. It's up to the rogue Lone Star and his best friend Barf to return her to her father on Druidia.
Dr. Slotkin will give your daughter back her old nose!
Spaceballs makes a credible attempt to nail the look of a science fiction film and probably ends up as one of the better looking 1980s space movies. It's certainly top 10 with some special effects that have really held up.
You've captured their stunt doubles!
It's a great cast with Bill Pullman, Daphne Zuniga.
That was my Virgin alarm. It's programmed to go off before you do.
The voices of Joan Rivers.
Pizza the Hut!
And Dom DeLuise, John Candy.
It's just that we got this thing about death. It's not us.
Rick Moranis.
At last, we are alone.
Dick Van Patten.
My cousin, Prince Murray, has a dealership in the valley. He was very nice to me.
We get the idea.
Mel Brooks is Spaceballs' idiot president, Scroob.
How do I know you're not making faces at me under that thing?
While also playing EGOT, master of that all-powerful force.
The Schwartz.
It's EGOT who tells us about the film's real reason for being.
Merchandising, where the real money from the movie is made.
There are small roles for Brooks' co-writers, as well as people like Michael Winslow, future Voyager star Tim Russ, and Brenda Strong.
Those are the guys that stole our uniforms! I beat the shit out of us too!
George Lucas's company ILM would handle the special effects, but Brooks had shown the script to George Lucas ahead of time to make sure there'd be no trouble with the parody aspect. Lucas was obviously cool with parodying Star Wars. After all, he'd go on to make the prequels. But in the 80s, his only caveat was that there should be no Spaceballs action figures for sale.
I didn't see you playing with your dolls again. Good!
Brooks' mantra on Spaceballs was you had to love something to spoof it. The original pitch was called Planet Moron, but was changed to avoid confusion with the British film Morons from Outer Space.
Spaceballs the flamethrower! The kids love this one.
Mel Brooks hadn't done a space spoof before, but Spaceballs just does a fantastic job of mimicking the look and feel of Star Wars, and yet did it so much better than many films that ripped off Star Wars but weren't actual parodies.
It's a transformer!
There are obvious groan-inducing jokes and long gaps left for audience laughter that can sometimes slow down the film when watching it at home, but it does have some absolutely hilarious scenes.
What? What is it?
Including John Hurt mocking his own role in Alien.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal.
Or a riff on Planet of the Apes.
Spaceballs? Oh, shit. There goes the planet.
Spaceballs is also the only Mel Brooks movie that I ever saw in a theatre, but this was a film that did just okay at the box office.
God willing, we'll all meet again in Spaceballs 2. The search for more money.
It has since become a classic to the point where a sequel of sorts is in the works.
Comb the desert!
Found anything yet? We ain't found shit!
There was also an animated series in 2008, so Spaceballs legend has merely grown with time.
How can there be a cassette of Spaceballs the movie? We're still in the middle of making it.
In 1989, Mel Brooks returned to television, co-creating The Nutt House with Sledgehammer creator Alan Spencer. It was an attempted blend of Mel Brooks' style and Fawlty Towers, but only lasted a few episodes in the US before quickly being pulled. As he seemed to do once every decade, Mel Brooks made a less overt comedy in 1991, Life Stinks. a film about a billionaire who bets he can live on the streets for 30 days. But in the middle of a recession, nobody wanted to see a Mel Brooks film that wasn't a goofy gag fest, and Life Stinks would end up as one of Mel Brooks' least successful movies. Still, it's one of the films that he is proudest of. By the early 90s, it seemed as though Mel Brooks may have run out of parody subjects. So why not just start a new cycle and revisit genres that he'd already done with a brand new parody?
Sounds like we're winning, son.
Robin Hood Men in Tights landed in 1993 and is another stab at the Robin Hood story, but this time it hews very closely to the story of the early 90s mega hit Robin Hood Prince of Thieves.
Every time they make a Robin Hood movie, they burn our village down.
But here it's got random 90s references littered throughout. Cary Elwes was Robin of Locksley, with Amy Yasbeck as Marion, both of whom seem quite in sync with the Brooks style.
No, no, no.
So while they joke about Kevin Costner's Robin Hood,
I can speak with an English accent.
Almost the entire cast apart from Roger Rees were from North America, with some people speaking in their normal voices, while others obviously consulted with Dick Van Dyke's Mary Poppins dialogue coach. He's still working? Good for him.
We'll bless them all until we get fresh naked. Join me!
There's also Richard Lewis and Dave Chappelle, as well as cameos from Patrick Stewart.
Hold this, Father.
Rabbi.
Whatever.
And Dom DeLuise doing a fantastic take on Marlon Brando in The Godfather.
What a theater.
Tracy Ullman and Isaac Hayes would also appear.
Send word to one and all in one. It's a little redundant, isn't it?
What?
Shut up!
While the film was financially successful and would become beloved by 90s kids, Men in Tights is not one of Mel Brooks' best.
Used to be shithouse.
And apart from his turn as Rabbi Tuckman, doesn't really feel like a Mel Brooks movie.
If only 'twere me.
Oh, if it were you, it would be terrific.
The best Mel Brooks movies all felt relatively timeless, where, some dated references aside, most of them still stayed fresh and funny. Robin Hood Men in Tights is chock full of references of the era. If I was really uncharitable, I would say that the topical jokes are based on somebody flicking through the channels one evening and basing all of the jokes on Jay Leno's monologue.
I don't understand a word you're saying.
Oh, just so you know, this kid is meant to be Kevin McAllister from Home Alone.
I gotta go home alone now.
So while it's a film that's loved by many, I'm just not one of them, where Men in Tights was a slog to get through, made worse by being almost as much of a slog to get through as When Things Were Rotten.
Things are looking up, huh?
Feels really small and enclosed, where, despite a decent budget, it gives off the vibe of a television movie rather than a feature. It also just feels like Mel Brooks was not as into it as he was with his earlier work.
Are you with me, yeah or nay?
Which one means yes?
It's almost as if somebody who was not named Mel Brooks wanted to make a Mel Brooks style movie. In the 90s, the parody genre begun by Mel Brooks and expanded by the Zaz team with Airplane and The Naked Gun began to expand dramatically with diminishing returns. Other filmmakers then entered the chat. There were parodies of Top Gun, erotic thrillers, action movies, space movies, spy movies, horror movies, and anytime a script wasn't up to snuff, they'd hire Leslie Nielsen to remind viewers that it was meant to be a comedy. Mel Brooks was now competing against people who'd been influenced by his movies. But hang on a second. Leslie Nielsen? That gives me an idea. With Men in Tights' success, Brooks spun up the machine for the 1995 release, Dracula, Dead and Loving It.
It must be done by one who loved her in life.
I only liked her.
While Mel Brooks had done the gothic horror comedy before, Dead and Loving It was a spoof on a more modern gothic horror hit, Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Danger.
Dead and Loving It is less scattergun than the Robin Hood movie, and it sticks to its target of Francis Ford Coppola's film like a limpet living in sin with a command hook. When I first saw the movie in the 90s, I really didn't like it very much, apart from one scene which I thought was hysterical.
And hit as hard as you can.
But also at the time, I hadn't yet seen B.S. Dracula. Now, if you have seen Coppola's film, then Dead and Loving It is much more enjoyable. Especially since its mainly American cast manage much better English accents than in Coppola's film.
I'm British.
Dead and Loving It is a mildly amusing takeoff of Bram Stoker's Dracula, though curiously it has more modern effects compared to Coppola's movie.
You may take my hat.
Amy Yasbeck was Mina, her Wings co-star Steven Weber was Harker, Lisette Anthony as Lucy, Harvey Korman as Dr. Seward, Peter McNichol as Renfield, Mel Brooks as Van Helsing, and Leslie Nielsen as Dracula. For me personally, Dracula Dead and Loving It is okay. I do think it's held up much better than Robin Hood Men in Tights, but at the time Dead and Loving It was not remotely successful, with it barely making back a third of its budget at the box office, and as such it would end up as the final feature directed by Mel Brooks. Brooks' next move was to return to the medium that originally inspired him to go into show business in the first place: musical theatre. He'd been pitched the idea of turning The Producers into a musical, and, well, when you've got it, flaunt it. Brooks had written the book for Broadway shows back in the 50s and partnered up with Thomas Meehan to adapt his first movie into a play.
Are you kidding? This play has got to close on page 4.
The Producers opened on Broadway in 2001, starring Nathan Lane as Max Bialystock and Matthew Broderick as Leo Bloom. The Producers was a massive success and would lead to a very long run on Broadway, touring versions playing around the world.
We had this specially made up for Max Bialystock.
And a feature film version in 2005, directed by the play's original director, Susan Stroman. Young Frankenstein would also be turned into another splash musical in 2007.
It's over!
Such was the success of Producers on Broadway that Curb Your Enthusiasm had a running plot throughout its fourth season where Larry David would take over in The Producers. Through all of this, Brooks and Bancroft, sick of The Producers' success, plotted to have the Broadway show fail by casting Larry David.
How did you know that he could ruin the show?
This guy's a disaster. He's a living disaster. He's a storm.
In the 2000s, Mel Brooks finally completed his EGOT. He'd already won the vowels, and now he got a G and a T, winning a Grammy for The 2,000-Year-Old Man and a Tony for The Producers. With the set complete, he concentrated on the next level of awards: the Game Awards for Best Multiplayer Game, a Nobel Prize for Chemistry, and a Century.
You win.
So as we've mentioned, several of Mel Brooks' films sought television adaptations or sequels, but as a reminder, Blazing Saddles had a television pilot, Spaceballs had an animated series, and a sequel's in production that of course is going to be released after this video was posted. History of the World Part 1 had a limited series sequel, History of the World Part 2, where a new generation of comedians influenced by Mel Brooks put together a sketch comedy series. It's got a couple of good bits and a lot of less good bits, but that's what they said about my homemade Rocky Road made with real rocks. And would you believe, Mel Brooks' co-creation Get Smart has been revived multiple times.
Always like to keep my audience riveted.
So that's our look at the career of comedy legend Mel Brooks, somebody whose legacy of laughs is always appreciated by me. Whenever I need a pick-me-up, I will put on a Mel Brooks movie. So I'm just going to very quickly rate some of these. So I can skip 12 Chairs or To Be or Not to Be or the 90s movies, but The Producers, Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein are absolutely brilliant. In the middle are the enjoyable gag fests Spaceballs and History of the World Part 1. Highly underrated but great is High Anxiety. But I would have to say that my own personal favourite Brooks co-creation would forever be Get Smart, where those 2 episodes screened on Sunday afternoons before the news were just the highlight of the weekend for me.
And loving it.
You'll of course have your own favourites, so feel free to talk about the stuff you like in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yes.
That's amazing. I've got the same combination on my luggage.